If you look back at the last few decades of handgun history, one thing becomes pretty obvious. The market didn't evolve in a straight line. It jumped forward when something disruptive showed up, challenged what people were used to, and forced manufacturers to rethink what actually mattered. That's especially true with 9mm handguns. This caliber didn't just become dominant because of ballistics or capacity alone. It became dominant because certain pistols arrived at exactly the right time and reshaped expectations. How a handgun should feel, how much it should hold, how it should be carried, and even who it was really built for. Some of the guns we're talking about today are old. Some are still extremely common, and a few of them sparked controversy when they first appeared. But each one marks a moment where the market shifted direction, not just slightly, but in a way that's still influencing what you see on shelves today. So instead of ranking what's best or most popular, let's do something more interesting. Let's take a look at the 9mm handguns that actually changed the market, and why the industry looks the way it does because of them. When people talk about striker-fired pistols, most conversations jump straight to Glock. And that makes sense, because Glock won the market. But before striker-fired became normal, before it was trusted, and before it was everywhere, the Walther P99 was already there, quietly proving the concept. The important thing about the P99 isn't how many units it sold, it's when it showed up. At the time, striker-fired was still viewed with a lot of skepticism. Traditional hammer-fired pistols dominated duty and service roles, and many shooters simply didn't trust a striker system yet. The P99 entered that space early and demonstrated that striker-fired pistols could be safe, shootable, and practical for serious use. Another thing that mattered was ergonomics. The P99 introduced grip contours and backstrap options that were well ahead of what most shooters were used to at the time. That influenced expectations going forward. Not just does it work, but does it fit different hands? That may sound obvious today, but at the time it wasn't. Most duty pistols were designed around a single grip profile, and shooters were expected to adapt. The P99 quietly flipped that idea. It suggested that fitting the shooter could be part of the design process, not an aftermarket solution. The P99 didn't reshape the market overnight, and it didn't become the dominant pistol of its era, but it helped normalize striker-fired handguns before the floodgates opened. And without that early groundwork, the market probably wouldn't have been ready for what came next. The Beretta 92 FS earns its place here for one reason: institutional influence. This wasn't about trends or consumer excitement. It was about standardization at the highest level. When the U.S. military adopted the Beretta 92 platform as the M9, it sent a clear message to the entire industry. 9mm wasn't a compromise caliber anymore. It was officially acceptable for service use, and that decision had ripple effects that went far beyond the military itself. Law enforcement agencies followed. International contracts followed. Ammunition development followed. Training doctrine followed. Even civilian perception shifted over time. Whether individual shooters preferred the Beretta or not didn't matter nearly as much as the fact that a major institution committed to it for decades. That long-term commitment stabilized the market. Manufacturers didn't just design pistols for civilians anymore. They designed around institutional requirements, testing standards, and procurement expectations that trickled down into the commercial space. The 92 FS also helped normalize double-stack 9mm pistols as duty standard equipment. Capacity expectations changed, size expectations changed, and suddenly, single-stack service pistols started to feel outdated. This wasn't a market change driven by innovation or consumer demand. It was driven by adoption at scale, and once that happened, the market adjusted around it. The CZ75 influenced the market in a very different way. It didn't rely on contracts, and it didn't dominate sales charts. Its impact came from shooters, especially people who cared deeply about control, ergonomics, and shootability. The grip angle, the internal slide rails, and the overall balance of the CZ75 stood out immediately to anyone who spent real time shooting it. This design showed that ergonomics weren't just a comfort feature. They affected performance, recoil control, follow-up shots, and overall shootability became part of the conversation, especially among experienced shooters. That perspective slowly filtered into competition circles and, eventually, into mainstream handgun design. Over time, competition shooters gravitated toward platforms that borrowed heavily from the CZ75's layout. Manufacturers took notes. Variants, clones, and evolutions started appearing across different price points and markets. The CZ75 didn't redefine the entire market overnight. Instead, It set a benchmark that other designs kept measuring themselves against. And today, when people talk about how a handgun points naturally or feels controllable under recoil, they're often describing expectations shaped by this design lineage. If there's one handgun on this list that completely reset expectations, this is it. And the reason the Glock 17 changed the market isn't because it was the most comfortable, or the prettiest, or even the most loved at the time. It changed the market because it forced everyone to rethink what a serious handgun could be made of. Before Glock showed up, polymer wasn't trusted. Steel and aluminum were seen as necessary for durability and longevity. Glock didn't argue that point in marketing. They just proved it in use. Agencies adopted it. Departments standardized it. And once that happened, the conversation was over. What mattered wasn't just the frame material. It was the entire system. Simple internals, consistent trigger operation, lower manufacturing costs paired with high reliability. Glock made it clear that handguns didn't need to be complicated to be effective, and the market responded fast. Simplified maintenance, ease of training, and consistent handling across large user groups became priorities. That mindset shaped not just pistol design, but how agencies evaluated long-term cost and logistics. After the Glock 17, polymer frames stopped being an experiment and became the default. Nearly every major duty pistol that followed exists in a world shaped by that decision, whether people admit it or not. The Smith & Wesson M&P9 didn't change the market by introducing something radically new. Instead, it changed the market by proving that Glock was no longer the only answer. For a long time, agencies that wanted a polymer striker-fired pistol basically had one realistic option. The M&P changed that. It gave departments a domestically produced alternative that met modern expectations while addressing some common complaints: grip angle, ergonomics, and feel in the hand. This mattered because competition reshapes markets faster than innovation alone. Once agencies had a viable second choice, Glock lost its uncontested position. Procurement processes shifted, training considerations shifted, and manufacturers realized that winning law enforcement contracts was no longer a one-horse race. The M&P didn't replace Glock across the board, and it didn't need to. Its impact came from balance. It created pressure, and that pressure pushed improvements across the entire category, not just from Smith & Wesson, but from everyone else trying to stay relevant. The Glock 19 belongs on this list because it quietly changed how people think about owning handguns, not just shooting them. Before the Glock 19, pistols were often bought with a specific role in mind. Duty guns were duty guns. Compact guns were compromises. What the Glock 19 showed was that one handgun could realistically cover multiple roles without feeling like a weak choice in any of them. It was large enough to shoot well, small enough to carry, and durable enough to trust for long-term use. That combination changed buying behavior. People started choosing versatility over specialization. Instead of owning multiple pistols for different purposes, many shooters settled on one platform that did everything well enough. That shift matters. It influenced how manufacturers sized future pistols and how consumers justified their purchases. The idea of the do-it-all 9mm didn't start with the Glock 19, but this is the model that made it normal. The reason the VP9 matters has very little to do with it being striker-fired. Plenty of pistols already were. What made the VP9 a market changer was who it came from, and what that signaled. For a long time, HK had a very specific reputation. Their handguns were known for durability and engineering, but they weren't designed around everyday shooters. Controls felt dated, grips were hit or missed depending on hand size, and ergonomics weren't the selling point. The VP9 marked a clear shift away from that mindset. This was one of the first times a major manufacturer treated ergonomics as a core requirement rather than a secondary feature. Adjustable side panels, back straps, and a grip shape that worked for a wide range of shooters weren't just nice additions. They became expected. After the VP9, it was harder for manufacturers to justify a one-size-fits-all grip. The VP9 didn't introduce a new category, and it didn't dominate contracts. Its impact was more subtle but still important. It raised the baseline. From that point on, comfort, grip geometry, and shooter interface became part of the standard conversation, not optional upgrades. The P365 didn't slowly influence the market. It shocked it. Before it came out, concealed carry and 9mm meant compromise. You either carried something slim with limited capacity or something thicker that was harder to live with day to day. The P365 changed that equation immediately by fitting double-digit capacity into a size people were used to seeing with single-stack pistols. What followed was one of the fastest market reactions in modern handgun history. Within a short time, nearly every manufacturer was racing to produce a competitor. That alone tells you how disruptive the design was. Companies don't move that fast unless they have to. More importantly, it changed expectations permanently. After the P365, low capacity was no longer accepted just because a pistol was small. Buyers started demanding more without increasing size, and manufacturers had no choice but to respond. This wasn't just a popular pistol. It redrew the boundaries of what concealed carry 9mm pistols were expected to offer, and there was no going back. The Hellcat earns the top spot not because it created the micro-compact category, but because it escalated it. Once the P365 proved the concept, the market didn't settle. It intensified. Springfield's approach with the Hellcat was simple and very deliberate. Push capacity as far as possible without growing the footprint. That decision turned innovation into competition. At that point, it was no longer about fitting enough rounds into a small pistol. It became about who could fit the most, reliably, while keeping recoil manageable and ergonomics usable. Capacity stopped being a bonus feature and became a defining spec. This shift mattered because it locked in a new standard. Today, micro-compact pistols are judged first by capacity, then by everything else. That wasn't the case before this generation of designs. The Hellcat didn't just respond to a trend. It helped cement it. And once that happened, the entire concealed carry segment adjusted around those expectations. When you look at these pistols side by side, the interesting part isn't which one you'd personally choose today. It's how each of them left a mark that's still visible in modern designs. Some changed materials, some changed size expectations, and others changed how much people demanded from a handgun before they were willing to buy it. Not every shift happened overnight, and not every design was universally loved. But together, these guns explain why the 9mm market looks the way it does right now, why certain features are expected, why others disappeared, and why manufacturers keep chasing the same ideas in slightly different ways. That context matters, especially if you're trying to understand trends instead of just following them. If you enjoyed this kind of breakdown, let me know in the comments which handgun you think truly changed the market, or which one you think I left out. Make sure to like the video if it helped. Subscribe for more honest, no-nonsense discussions like this. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.